The talk is of peace, but he was dressed for war. On a rare visit to his troops, Vladimir Putin had a message that Russia has no intention of backing down.
We have our own tasks, our own goals. The most important of these is the unconditional achievement of the goals of the special military operation and the fulfillment of the objectives set before us.
And it's clear Russia's on the offensive at the negotiating table too. In Kyiv, American officials presented Ukraine with a new peace proposal, drawn up after holding secret talks with Moscow.
Nice to see you. We are thankful to President Trump. Best regards to him.
President Trump and our Vice President pass along their very best.
Warm words, but not good news for Kyiv. The proposals reportedly include the surrender of the Donbass, which Russian forces are yet to occupy the whole of, and limits on Ukraine's armed forces, both of which are major concessions for Kyiv. But the White House has defended the deal.
It's a good plan for both Russia and Ukraine, and we believe that it should be acceptable to both sides, and we're working very hard to get it done.
It's only a month since the Kremlin appeared to have fallen out with the White House. A second summit between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump was abruptly cancelled by the US president, remember, after Russia's refusal to make any concessions. And that was followed up with sanctions. But now it appears to be all change again. Moscow's apparently back in Washington's good books. Reports of the secret talks have caused concerns in Europe and warnings that they must have a seat at the table.
Of course, for any plan to work, it needs Ukrainians and Europeans on board. So this is very clear.
There was some contact between Russia and Ukraine away from the battlefield. The two sides exchanged more bodies of dead soldiers. But when it comes to peace talks, Kyiv is being kept at arm's length. Ivor Bennett, Sky News, Moscow.
So we don't know for sure what's in this document. Some details have been reported over the past 24 hours, though. Ukraine could be forced to hand over the eastern Donbass region, effectively leasing out its land. Kyiv's armed forces could be cut by half, and long-range missiles that could strike deep inside Russia would be banned. US military assistance would end or be reduced, and the peacekeeping force being planned by the so-called coalition of the willing would be allowed to enter Ukraine. We'll discuss the timing of all of this in a moment, but let's get started. We won't get started with that. We'll go straight to Dominique Waghorn, our international affairs editor. Dom, there's a lot to try and unpack because in many ways it does feel like we've been here before, but this time there seems to be a 28-point peace plan, so almost like it's worse.
Yeah, we have been here before in that 2022, when the Russians had sort of stormed into as much of Ukraine as they were ever going to take, they presented these maximalist demands that sound very similar to what we're hearing today, dressed up as a peace plan that was then forced back, and they've never held so much of Ukraine since then. Been on the back foot, and still until recently they've been pushing forward and incrementally taking more and more of Ukraine. So basically what has happened is Steve Witkoff has met with Kirill Dmitriev, we think in Mar-a-Lago, and between them they've kind of cooked up this plan which has taken everybody by surprise, possibly even the US State Department, who are not prepared to comment on the plan. What is not clear at the moment is how much this is Witkoff kind of freelancing, and how many other people in the administration, like Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, who is more hawkish on Russia and Ukraine, have bought into this. But it is now being presented as a plan that was kind of concocted in secret, but does now have President Trump's approval, which makes it obviously significant. And I think we have to remember, obviously, always with this war, it started because it was an invasion. The best way to end a war begun by an invasion is to end the invasion, to reverse it. What this plan does is it rewards the invasion because it says that Ukraine should hand over the Donbass, some of which Russia has taken, but a fair amount of it. The Ukrainians have fought tooth and nail, lost tens of thousands of soldiers to retain. They're now being asked to just give that up for nothing to the Russians. As you were saying, they give up their long-range weapons. It won't even allow foreign diplomats, planes to land in Ukraine after the peace, and foreign soldiers won't be allowed there either. So these are non-starters for the Ukrainians, and a number of these proposals that Kyiv has already said is unacceptable. Europeans are putting a kind of polite face on it today, but I think they must be privately saying what on earth is going on and seeking clarification from the Trump administration. But what it shows, I think most of all, is that whenever we think Donald Trump has kind of lost patience with Russia, only back in September he was saying that Ukraine could possibly win this war, he just goes back to a default position, often led there by his old golf buddy turned chief negotiator, Steve Witkoff. But it puts pressure on Zelensky at a time which is particularly painful, of course, for the Ukrainian president.
I'm going to get to that pain that the Ukrainian president is feeling, but I want to first bring in our US correspondent, Mark Stone, who joins us from Washington. Mark, Dom and I are just talking about the fact that it very much feels like we've been here before. We left the UN General Assembly and the three of us were all there reporting on this very story. It felt like Volodymyr Zelensky was the winner of that General Assembly, frankly, because Donald Trump said, listen, I don't think he actually needs to give up any territory. Now this, and Dom's sort of saying this feels slightly worse now than what we've seen before because of this plan.
Yeah, I was going to bring up precisely that the UN, which was just a couple of months ago, and a completely different feeling. I mean, there's a kind of sense of bewilderment, honestly, around this, because back then, you know, I was with Zelensky. I asked him precisely the question, you know, is this a game changer? Because Trump had just sent out that message on Truth Social saying, look, Ukraine can win back all of its land. It felt like a complete revolution in Trump's own head being articulated through Truth Social. And it was certainly the case that Volodymyr Zelensky was you know, he was ecstatic at what had been said there. And yet, where are we now? In a completely different place once again with America, Trump's America appearing to be right behind a Putin plan. I was talking to the Ukrainians here in Washington yesterday, and the view then, and I think it's probably the same today, although I haven't been able to get hold of them today, is that once again, it appears as though the Americans are being taken for a ride by the Russians. It has to be said that on the face of it, what Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, is claiming, and she did in her news conference today, is that, I'm looking at the words here, we're working on a plan quietly. So she was admitting what emerged yesterday afternoon. We're working with both sides equally, she said. And the inference was that only one side had leaked out, that people had got wind of this 28-point plan, and she was kind of suggesting, although no one frustratingly followed up with the pertinent question, but she was suggesting that you've only seen one side, the 28-point plan. That may not be the entirety of it. We're talking to the Ukrainians as well, kind of just wait and see, was what she was saying. But I still get the sense that this is very much weighted towards the Russians. To pick up Dom's point, I can tell you from sources I've spoken to who are among the coalition of the willing countries within Europe, they are very much playing catch up. They are very much trying to find out what this new American plan looks like. And then you kind of, at last point, you only have to look at the man who has been sent to sit around the table with Volodymyr Zelensky. He's Dan Driscoll. He is a very, very inexperienced politician within the Trump administration. He is the secretary for the army, 38 years old. He may well be good at what he does, but he is not the kind of experienced, very senior politician that you would expect, a kind of Marco Rubio figure who you would expect will be sitting around the table with the Ukrainian president at this juncture.
Mark, I'm just going to keep you there and come back to Dom, because you were talking about this moment being a difficult moment for Volodymyr Zelensky, and we've all spoken to him at different points during this conflict. He's often talked about how much stress he's feeling, but this time these corruption allegations are right deep in his inner circle.
Yeah, and it's been no secret that Ukraine has been a pretty corrupt country, and it's been accused of endemic corruption by its enemies in Russia, but also in America. But he is now embroiled in a very difficult corruption scandal that's sort of striking people very, very close to him. And the allegations are that members of his administration, but also close sort of partners of him, have been raking off money, basically taken from money that was meant to go towards rebuilding Ukraine's power infrastructure, which is particularly galling for Ukrainians, of course, as they hunker down in the cold temperatures of late November, and they are without power very often because of what Russia is doing to their electricity industry. And so, he is in difficulty politically. There's martial law still in Ukraine. There will be as long as this war goes on. We have to assume, therefore, he can't be toppled from power. But he's under pressure to at least sack, some key advisors. And the speculation is that Witkoff, with his Russian partner, is hitting him when he's down, hoping that is going to give him leverage. But actually, I'm talking to, as Mark was saying, they're Ukrainians, but Ukrainians in Kyiv today saying actually the opposite's going to happen. Ukrainians are going to be outraged that the Americans are taking advantage of his political difficulty, whatever they make of this corruption scandal, and they're not happy with it at all. They're also not happy with the idea of Americans springing on them a plan that is being presented as a peace plan, but is effectively a demand, an ultimatum for surrender.
And Mark, I guess, we've talked a little bit about how we've been here throughout the course of the last year. Frankly, Donald Trump is an unpredictable character, and who knows where we're likely to be in the next few weeks and whether this plan actually does get off the ground.
Yeah, and actually, I'm not totally convinced that the sort of what we've been talking about, this 28-point plan and the reporting that's been going around for the past 24 hours, the extent to which that is actually under the nose of Donald Trump yet. I mean, it's clearly he has dispatched his envoy, Steve Witkoff, who solved, on the face of it at least for now, the Gaza conflict, dispatched him to deal with this one, the one conflict that he says he can't solve. And actually, only a couple of days ago, I was thinking that we hadn't really discussed Ukraine for quite a while, and I wondered where Steve Witkoff was. Well, it turns out he was between Miami and Moscow, putting together this plan. So I think it has to be presented to Trump, and I think clearly there will be a desire by the Europeans, as has happened before, and the Ukrainians, to now lobby Trump and say, well, hang on a minute, what appears to be a 28-point plan is not going to work, and we're kind of going round in circles again and again and again.
Mark, thank you so much, as always, for bringing us up to date. Now, you may remember the Oscar-winning documentary, 20 Days in Mariupol, about the siege of one of the Ukraine's cities after Russia invaded. Well, that team have produced a new project, 2,000 metres to Andrivka. Just have a look.
The village is 2,000 metres ahead. 35 seconds for a mortar shell to fly. A 2-minute drive. A 10-minute run. But here, time doesn't matter. Distance does, and it's measured by pauses between the explosions.
Well, the film offers a blow-by-blow account of Ukraine's 3rd Assault Brigade in 2023 during President Zelensky's much-anticipated counteroffensive as they advance through their destroyed homeland. And Mstislav Chernov is with me here tonight. Thank you so much for joining us here again. I do remember that extraordinary film, 20 Days in Mariupol, where you focused on the civilians and the toll it had taken, frankly, the bombardment, the flattening of Mariupol that we had seen. This particular documentary focuses on the soldiers, the troops, the front lines. Just talk me through that experience.
Which, when we say soldiers, which are actually the whole point of this documentary is to see through that uniform, to see that they are civilians, truck drivers, policemen, students, warehouse workers, and they are walking through this tiny, narrow strip of forest squeezed between two minefields towards the village of Andriivka, which is strategic on the way to liberate the city of Bakhmut, which was occupied in spring 2023. And I think that story, over the time, it was about the counteroffensive, but now I realize as we are entering this new phase of this war with negotiations, with demands for Ukraine to have land concessions, I realized how important it was to record the price that Ukrainian troops paid for liberation of every meter of that land, and just the attachment to that land, which has our memories, our childhoods in it, and just is so dear.
Which is something we've seen from Ukraine over the course of the last few years. I remember when Joe Biden made that phone call to Volodymyr Zelensky and said, I can give you a ride. And he said, I don't need a ride. We want to stay and we want to fight for our country. And over the course of the last few years, we've all interviewed in Ukraine ordinary civilians who have gone to the front lines to figure out what they can actually do. What do you think about this moment then when you talk about documenting 2023, the counter-offensive, to where the situation is now?
It's a difficult moment, but more than ever, I can see that Ukrainians have this longing for peace. Everyone is just so tired to wake up and be afraid for your friends, for your children, to be afraid that another city will be lost tomorrow, and just to see this homes and lives being swallowed by the invasion, by the country who doesn't really need more land, but still goes forward and forward. And I just really hope that Ukrainians will have a chance to rebuild their country and just to live normally.
I remember the pressure that was mounting on Ukraine in 2023 during that counteroffensive. And I interviewed President Zelensky, who said, this is not a Hollywood film. You know, you're all treating it like this is the big moment. When you think back to that, do you wonder what the point of the pressure internationally was, given now Ukraine is being asked to cede territory?
There was a lot of expectations, and I think it was a defining moment because it was the second biggest operation since the World War II. Oh my God, first biggest operation since World War II. And there was so much expectations because on the result of how that ends, it would depend whether international community would demand this land to be given to Russia, or Ukraine will manage to liberate it and then just continue to live peacefully. And now we see the result of that. We see how hard it was, and it wasn't that much land that it was liberated, but it still was amazing to watch how a little Ukraine goes against the huge invader with nuclear bombs, with millions of people and endless resources, and still manages not to even retreat, but take something back, like have the agency in it. And for the country that is defending itself, its existence, that's crucial. That hope, that little flag of a little village of Andriivka, that is literally why we are all alive.
And at the time, the analysis was that this war is being fought with artillery. It's sort of almost a very backward way of fighting. The soldiers in trenches. But you look at the situation now, the drone technology that's been developed as a result of where Ukraine is today from this war.
And it didn't happen just because there was suddenly an amazing spike in technologies and then everything became available and it was just used. Right now, what we know is that about 80% of all the casualties on the front line are inflicted by drones, by drone warfare. And what that means is that when support was unreliable and support was great, but also unreliable for Ukrainians, they had to invent everything themselves. Like most of these drones you see, most of this 80% that we're talking about, those are drones that are assembled somewhere in basements or little workshops. So that's just a survival instinct. It's not just breakthrough in science, but what you see now is very, very different from what was in 2023.
So as a Ukrainian, when you speak to other Ukrainians, what is the expectation now of what might happen?
It's quite interesting. Actually, there's very little of these news we're talking about here make it to the front line. There has been so many claims, so many peace plans, so many offers, so many back and forth promises, support for Ukraine, support for Russia, some kind of deals, and all that amounted to nothing, no actions whatsoever. been made. So by this time, there is a lot of skepticism on the front line and among the civilians that any of these talks will result in anything. Everyone wants peace. And I think the signals are coming from Ukrainian government, Ukrainian military, Ukrainian civilians are consistent. We are okay. Please stop. Just stop. But then again, it takes two sides to stop. It takes Russia to stop bombing civilians. It takes Russia to stop advancing on the battlefield. And that's just not what's happening, regardless of what is said in those rooms. And a lot of effort has been made. It's just, what I mean is just the reflection of it we don't really see.
Myslav Chernov, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme.
Thank you.
And a quick apology from us for the language in the subtitles for that clip we showed you ahead of our conversation. Hey, you're watching The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Still to come, a fire forces delegates at the COP30 climate summit to run for the exits. We'll be live in Brazil next.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin.
The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks.
If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach. This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
What might happen if Russia attacked the UK?
This is clearly an enormous show of force.
It is definitely out of the ordinary.
We ran a war game with former ministers back in the hot seat.
Ben Wallace.
Amber Rudd.
Jack Straw.
It's the kind of war game that's genuinely tested inside government.
The Russians are signalling that there may be an attack.
Russia knows our weaknesses, but do you? I'm Deborah Haynes. From Sky News and Tortoise, this is The War Game. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Let's go to the COP30 summit in Brazil, where climate talks were put on hold after a fire forced negotiators to evacuate the venue where the conference is being held. A siren sent delegates, observers and journalists running for the exits as police put up a barrier preventing anyone from getting near the area. Officials say the fire is under control and no one was hurt. Well, let's go to our climate reporter, Victoria Seabrook, who joins us from the summit. And Victoria, just bring us up to date.
Yeah, so this broke out about 2:30 local time, and it was quite chaotic to start with. We were actually on our way, just coincidentally, to where the fire broke out at the time. And as we kind of set off, we had people running away from us, people running towards us. People didn't really know what was happening. Closer to the fire, of course, they did. It broke out in the pavilion area, which is where countries have these sort of trade stalls and show off what they're doing. The whole of the blue zone, which is the kind of inner secure area secured by the UN at these talks, was evacuated. The fire was put out quite quickly. We understand that 13 people are being treated on site for smoke inhalation, but fortunately nothing more serious than that. COP hasn't reopened yet, but although the fire was out quite quickly and the damage was relatively much smaller than it could have been, bearing in mind this takes place in these huge tent-like structures made of kind of tarpaulin plastic material. Although that was over fairly quickly, the real damage is what this could do to these negotiations. Countries have come here from more than 190 countries around the world so that they can be in the same room together to try and solve some of the world's big problems. You can have a debate afterwards about how well what they agree translates into the real world, but certainly they are trying to solve some of the big economic, social and environmental issues here. That's why they've come.
Yeah, absolutely, Victoria, and it's been going on for some time. Have there been any real announcements or progress, or has everything sort of come to a screeching halt because of this sudden fire?
Well, it always gets to this stage in the negotiations. We're nearing the end. We've got about 24 hours left to go in theory, although they often overrun. And this is where everything starts to pick up pace as everyone tries to meet the deadline. Some of the most controversial kind of dividing lines that countries are still trying to agree on are the future of fossil fuels, which are the #1 cause of climate change. There was a pledge at one of these UN climate summits 2 years ago at COP28 to transition away from fossil fuels, and not much has been done on that in the 2 years since. So there's a push from about 80 countries to say, OK, well, we've got the target, now let's come up with a plan of how we do that, but not everyone is on board, so we don't yet know if that will make it into the final deal. They were actually trying to agree on that section of it last night, but they missed that self-imposed deadline. And of course, the slower that countries go on the causes of climate change, the worse the impacts get. And so the concept of how you adapt, how you cope with those impacts is rising right up the agenda and becoming even more political. So that's things like worse drought in Afghanistan, that is flooding in Bangladesh, with developing nations who typically have done less to cause climate change with their smaller economies, tend to be disproportionately affected by more extreme weather, and saying to richer countries, you've caused this and you've promised us some money to help us cope, but either it's been delivered late or it hasn't materialised. So still some major fault lines for countries to try and bridge as and when they can get back in the same room together.
Victoria, thanks so much. This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim, next up. With inclusion on the agenda at the upcoming G20 in South Africa, we hear from a group who feel they've been sidelined.
we are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club. 4 more years! Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
South Africa is hosting leaders from the world's biggest economies for the annual G20 summit, which gets underway in Johannesburg this weekend. On the agenda, solidarity and inclusion. But some of the country's indigenous tribes say they've been sidelined. Our Africa correspondent Yusra El-Bagir reports.
A gathering of tribal leaders from around the world on the edges of the African continent. As South Africa prepared to host the G20 summit, Indigenous people held a global summit of their own. South Africa is celebrated as the cradle of humanity and a beacon of inclusivity, but Indigenous groups feel relegated to the sidelines in the post-apartheid state.
In order for us to heal nature, Mother Nature and Mother Earth is calling us, it's calling our attention to come together, especially as Indigenous people, because with Indigenous people, we are still connected to our lands. We are still connected to our intellectual property. We're connected to who we are. G20 is a politically based gathering. Let me call it a gathering. They are coming together to determine the future of people politically. So the difference is that we will seek what Mother Earth wants from us.
This is her kingdom. A land grab of 2,000 hectares in the Western Cape. Queen Eloise lives here with 4,000 other people. Many of them are from the indigenous Khoisan community who say they're reclaiming land stolen by settlers when they arrived in the 1600s. What made you decide to come and live on this land?
The calling from our ancestral graves sent us down here. So we had an urge to get our own identity and to get back to our roots. And that was the driving mode behind everything. So we are here now because we take back our ancestral grounds that we urged for so long, you know.
Land reform in post-apartheid South Africa is a contentious issue. A white minority still own a majority of land here. And the land seized from indigenous people centuries ago is even further down the agenda, making land grabs like this one a challenge to the image of a progressive country.
We're not going to be thrown off, and I'm not scared. I'm here 5 years fighting battles, and I won't allow them doing that, throwing us down like animals.
In the heart of Cape Town is another Khoisan reclamation, formalized and part of a deal with developers who are building Amazon's South African headquarters.
This is, it's taken a long time to get here.
First Nations leader and Chief Zenzile Khoisan is adamant that his people will be integrated into this globalization.
There are many people who would like to fetishize indigenous people, who want to relegate us to an anthropoid state, as if that is the only place that we can, as if we don't have the tools to navigate the modern world.
What do you make of South Africa hosting G20 this year and the theme of inclusivity?
There is a disingenuous thread that runs right through many of these gatherings, and the G20 is no different from any of it. I'm very concerned that the many marginalized sections of society, you know, youth, indigenous people, are not inside the front and center of this agenda.
Their native tongues are at risk of dying, not included in South Africa's 12 official languages. Nishada and Escher are guides at a San Heritage Center on South Africa's west coast. built here on land for the descendants of the San people.
People have heard that like San people died out or disappeared. So some people, when they come here and you introduce yourself in the language, they will ask you like, what language are you speaking? And you say, I'm speaking San. But they ask you like, how can you speak San? Because San people have died out. You'll be like, no, we're still there, we're still existing.
As global leaders gather in South Africa for a G20 summit under the banner of solidarity, equality and sustainability, the country's incensed indigenous communities continue to be shut out.
There are room for expansion of the Khoi and San people.
But they are neither silent nor waiting for the government or the world to pull out a seat at the table. Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky News, Western Cape.
Well, one leader whose absence will be noticed at the G20 is Donald Trump. He's boycotting the summit, citing allegations of race-based persecution of South Africa's white Afrikaner minority. Here's the moment the US president clashed with his South African counterpart at the White House back in May.
Just put this on, it's right behind you. Those people were all killed.
Have they told you where that is, Mr. President? No, I'd like to know where that is, because this I've never seen.
Death, 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 horrible death. People are fleeing South Africa for their own safety. Their land is being confiscated, and in many cases they're being killed. And that scene of, you see how many crosses they have. Those crosses, that's a dead person in every one of them.
Well, that was President Donald Trump back in May. I'm joined now by Dr. Pete Krokamp, a professor of political studies who signed an open letter dismissing Trump's claims of a white genocide. Thank you so much for joining us here on the programme. I just want to first of all ask you why you wrote that open letter to dismiss Donald Trump's claims, because, of course, he's now gone on to boycott the G20 summit.
Well, we wrote the letter because what he said is simply not true, is devoid of any facts. It's not even based on a misunderstanding. It is simply a deliberate effort to identify a genocide in South Africa that does not exist. There is no evidence for it. And we thought as Afrikaners, because at the same time while he's making these suggestions, he also changed American policy to a whites-only immigrant policy. And then he allowed Afrikaners, 7,500 of them, in terms of this policy, to migrate on a privilege basis to the United States. We, as Afrikaners, don't need that type of disinformation and targeting of Afrikaners. We are not targeted by black South Africans. We are not targeted by the government. We're not persecuted in South Africa. Donald Trump, like many other things, has gotten this one horribly wrong.
What do you think it does to the relationship between South Africa and the United States when Donald Trump is making such a point of this, as you say, describing the situation as genocide? I mean, yesterday I interviewed someone about the Christians in Nigeria. This is a sort of part of an ongoing rhetoric that he has been using, a language that he has been using. But in terms of South Africa, what sort of damage do you think it does to the relationship?
I think part of the problem that one of the consequences of this is that there's a divide between white South Africans. The Afrikaners have become isolated because the vast majority of South Africans don't think of white South Africans as people that seek privilege protection. But the Afrikaners has become a very specific target. And I think the government is really, really concerned about that. And when they push back against Donald Trump and these things, this misinformation, Trump is not a rational person. At times, some of the things that he says sounds like he's really, really mentally and intellectually challenged. And it disturbs the South African government if it's not a rational type of person that you can actually argue with. How do you convince Donald Trump that this is simply not the truth? Because it seems like he doesn't listen to his intelligence people, he doesn't listen to information, he never reads a newspaper, he's not well informed, And he prefers not to be informed because he's got his own ideas and agenda about South Africa. And we in South Africa feels that it's because we have a black government by and large. This is a racist attack. If you look at the immigrant policy, if you look at how he dealt with minorities in America, he's exporting his cultural wars and his racist policies in America to South Africa.
How do you think the South African government should handle this then?
Probably we really try to be very delicate because it's got an unpredictable nature to him. And I think we really try to be as diplomatic as possible to deny what's happening, but not offend him because it has massive consequences. The tariffs that he's imposed on South Africa can leave thousands of people. Unfortunately, it will be the poorest of the poor. It will mostly be black South Africans that will be left unemployed if some of these policies that he has enacted against South Africa, if it's been followed through. So it has massive consequences for us, and we really try it. Like everybody else, I think the Canadian president, Keir Starmer, went there, and they really went there on their knees to the White House. What more can you do than almost going there with a begging bowl like all the Western leaders almost did? And still you get this irrational person that uses political power to, in some other way, determine trade relations. And it has massive consequences for us. The South African government has done what it could. It is not possible to please Donald Trump. I don't think we can please Donald Trump because it don't seem people much more powerful, like the British government, like the European governments. Nobody could do it, like the Indians. They couldn't do it. So why will we? And he has targeted us very specifically. And let's be blunt about it. It's a racist war against South Africa by Donald Trump.
Where do you think he's getting this information from?
He sucked it from his thumb because there's no evidence for it. There's not a single... I've spoken to people at the American Embassy. I've spoken to a lot of people in several places in the world. I've spoken to Chris Coons, the Delaware senator in America. Nobody knows where he gets his information from. It is simply not true. There's no evidence for it. And if you ask the right people, people who do the research in South Africa, who live here, they will tell you that there is no evidence for a white genocide. And we don't need him to export policies which we construe to be racist to South Africa. We already have this horrendous history. We already find it difficult to deal with the consequences of the legacy of apartheid. We simply don't need somebody who do not understand what's going on and then superimpose his own racist ideals about what's going on in America onto South Africa.
Dr. Pete Krookamp, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Next up on the programme, why women across South Africa are planning to lie down for 15 minutes tomorrow to bring the nation to a standstill.
I'm Dominic Waghorn, Sky's International Affairs Editor, covering a world that seems to be unravelling. War, unrest, revolutions.
It's not his country, it's ours.
They have succeeded for the first time in their country's history in removing a leader from power. No freedom! Sky News, the full story first. There was fighting here, but there's clearly now a lull, and they're using it to bring up more ammunition. This is a mass exodus in which Russia is hemorrhaging some of its brightest and its best. According to the local weather channel, there have been more than 2,500 lightning strikes and flash flooding, all on top of this week's lethal tornado. What stays with you most in this job is some of the people you meet. What is your worst fear about what the Russians want to do to the children?
They're just boosting demographics by stealing young people.
Would you like to take the opportunity, Mr. President, on Sky News to invite Barack Obama to come here? Mr. Trump, are you running for president? Can you confirm it?
We're going to take a look, a very serious look.
On that day, we saw your fighters killing women, killing children. Was that a mistake? Did you go too far? You couldn't control your fighters? The full force of the state is being used to crush any protest. Free wherever you get your news. It's half an hour now past the deadline that Hamas issued, and we've now seen a third barrage of rockets coming in. Another alarm. The mood here is jittery and nervous. We're seeing the world get more and more divided, and it's our job to try to make sense of it all.
I'll tell you on another day on the podcast what that was all about.
Welcome to the world.
Come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Russia knows our weaknesses, but do you? This is the war game.
There were a number of armed security.
We want to discover, to find out what's really going on.
Everything you need to know about British politics in about 20 minutes. I actually don't like political drama.
So, where next?
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin.
The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks.
If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach. This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
Welcome back. At midday tomorrow, women across South Africa will hold a national shutdown, and here's why. South Africa has one of the highest femicide rates in the world. Around 15 women are killed a day, many by their partners. According to police stats, more than 5,500 people were murdered in South Africa in the 12 months to March 2024, a rise of a third compared with the same period the year before. The UN says Africa recorded the highest number of female intimate partner violence in the world in 2023. Well, I'm joined now by Cameron Kasambala, spokesperson at Women for Change. Thank you very much, Cameron, for joining us on the programme. These stats are horrifying, this idea that around 15 women are killed a day, and many of them by their partners.
I think people have this idea of this ideal victim and what they expect to happen. And it's a stranger that you've never met that you bump into, and then they attack you. And the scariest thing is often they're living in our homes. They're sleeping next to us. They're raising us. And I think that's so much scarier in many ways, that you never know who you can fully trust.
And just compare these numbers that we're hearing about the situation of femicide in South Africa to other parts of the world.
When you live here and you're hearing 6 times the global average rate femicide, you're hearing, that we're the rape capital of the world, it truly makes you wonder, how bad is it here? But I think with this movement and our shutdown that's brought attention to us is how much of a global crisis gender-based violence is, because we're hearing a lot of stories coming from other countries across the world as well, speaking to their own experience. And I think even within South Africa, our statistics are misleading. In our most recent crime statistics, there was no mention of femicide and child murder. So there's a clear omission of data that probably would bring even more insight into even what's happening in South Africa.
Do you think that there is starting to be a bit of a shift? I mean, you're launching this national shutdown. Are those in positions to bring about a change, or for there to be more accountability, actually paying attention?
I think they really are. I mean, Women for Change, we held a demonstration in April on the 11th where we gave our petition handover to the government. And the response that we see took several months, and essentially they said they had all the framework and policies in place and they were doing enough work. But you listed some scary statistics: 15 women killed every single day, a 33.8% increase in femicide. Those are not numbers that come when you have comprehensive frameworks being implemented. And we have amazing policies and legislation. We have the Domestic Violence Act, Protection from Harassment Act, the National Strategic Plan to tackle gender-based violence and femicide. And yet the implementation continues to be lacking. But as of recently, when we have now seen the global reaction to our shutdown, we're truly seeing the government begin to react. Now we've been receiving a lot of, invitations to join meetings, and that's what we've been in recently. We had a meeting last week and another one this week where we've been in discussions, and, that has led to us now being able to state that the president has signed that, gender-based violence and femicide can be classified as a national disaster.
And, what's extraordinary is what you have just said about the fact that there are policies in place, things are being discussed, but fundamentally there needs to be a societal shift, not just in South Africa, but with, as you say, domestic violence, femicide is something that occurs all over the world. It's just not discussed enough.
No, I completely agree with you. I think, like I said, with this movement, we're really seeing how many people are impacted. And our petition reached over 1 million signatures. And it wasn't just coming from South Africa. We've received responses across the world. And I think for us, it's sad, but we're seeing so many similarities as much as there are differences in the roots of gender-based violence. We look at patriarchy, masculinity associated with violence, a lot of these similar trends with slightly different nuances. And I think for us, our gratitude is that because of the international support and solidarity, it's pushed pressure on our government, not just from us as citizens locally, but from, international bodies that are seeing what we're doing. And I think that has made our government react so much more effectively.
Cameron, what are you hoping to achieve from this shutdown tomorrow?
This shutdown is important. As much as we have had, the president discuss this as classifying this as a national disaster, the reality is that many lives have been lost due to this negligence. Many women and members of the LGBTQIA+ community have been killed because of the lack of response, the lack of implementation, transparency. Like, this is still something that we need to do. We still need to honor and memorialize all these lives that have been lost. And I think for us, what we need to see is true action. They've been saying that they've been doing these things and we've been receiving a lot of high-level promises. But the reality is we don't have audits, we don't have reports, we don't have evidence of anything that's really happening. And that is what we need. We need evidence of the fact that they are implementing this properly. We cannot have these conversations continuously saying that we're signing papers and we're agreeing to things and then see no implementation. And hopefully classifying this as a national disaster is holding them to a certain level of accountability to South Africans as well as the world.
Cameron Kasambala, spokesperson at Women for Change, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I have a question for you, but first, just have a look at these images. Well, is this an alien battleship or a rare comet from another star system? To you and me, it looks like a fuzzy white dot, but it has fired up space detectives around the world, and now NASA say they know the answer. It is from another world, they say, but it isn't an alien spaceship. It's a comet, and only the third known visitor from a star outside our solar system. And by Christmas, it will be the closest to the Earth that it's ever been. But there is still a mystery. Where in the vastness of space is it actually from? Well, I'll leave you with that thought. News at 10 is next.